Hi everybody, welcome to New Dimensions in Dasha Analysis. This is the first class. It's really our first class in a series of 10 and 20 classes on Dashas. For people who have signed up for the class, we will be a real class. For people who are interested in Dashas, this is an ocean in a drop. We try to kind of give an overview of all the things that we'll cover in this lesson. So sometimes it's like I used to be a college professor, and sometimes the first day of class you have to kind of go over all the things that you're going to do. Sometimes you don't have a chance to do real in-depth things. You kind of get an overview of things, but we will teach you some things today, and we'll kind of give you a taste of things that will be coming. I'm going to do a sound check real quickly. Lately I haven't had trouble. Affy, how's the sound?
Sounds good.
Okay. So I'm going to keep you muted, just to keep any background noise on. Inevitably, somebody has something going on in the background with kids screaming and stuff like that. I will take questions with different parts of the talk. I can't talk straight, so I will pause for questions, and then you can type your questions usually in on GoToWebinar, and you can also, sometimes I'll try to unmute people and ask for questions. Sometimes it's hard for me to see raised hands. Sometimes they don't mean anything. Let's see. Okay. So let me continue here. Here's my contact information. Actually, we usually use Barry 2 these days. Barry 2 at Applied Vedic Astrology. Most of you know my website, appliedvedicastrology.com. On Skype, I'm at Barry 4. Most of you know me on Facebook at Barry Rosen. I have kind of daily blogs there. So I usually start the webinar with some Vedic chanting. It kind of gets me in touch with Ganesh. Again, I just kind of show up. Ganesh does all the work. So I'll start with some Vedic chanting now, and then we'll go over a little bit more what we're going to do. Om Ganeshaya Namaha, Om Ganeshaya Namaha, Om Ganeshaya Namaha, Om Ganapatiye Namaha, Om Ganapatiye Namaha, Om Ganapatiye Namaha. Vakritunda Mahakaya Suryakoti Samaprapa Nirvigyam Kurame Deva Sarvakareshi Sarvada Jnanamulam Guru Murti Pujamulam Guru Padam Mantramulam Guru Vakyam Mokshamulam Guru Kripa Sahana Bhavatu Sahano Bhunaktu Sahaviryam Karvavahai Tejasvinavatitamstu Ma Vivishai Om Shanti 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 Om Aditaye Somaye Mangulai Buddhaye Cha Guru Shukrashini Bishara Have Ketave Namaha. Then honoring the great ones, Lord Krishna, Goddess Saraswati, Goddess of Wisdom, Vedavyasa, writer and cognizer of the Vedas, and my holy spiritual tradition going back to Brahmananda Saraswati, who passed away in 1953. Stand on the shoulders of many great Jyotish teachers, Sanjay Rath, Camilla Sutton, Bill Levacy, Robert Koch, Andrew Foster, a couple that I'm naming. Now let me go over what we'll do today, and then I'll also give you a couple more pieces of information. So I've divided this course up into 2 10-lesson sections. So some people, it's hard for them to commit to a 20-week class. You can commit to the first part if you think you know a lot about dashas, and again, I always teach things on a kind of an intermediate level anyway. You could just start with part 2, which will kind of go over alternative dashas and Rashi dashas, but I do recommend, I teach material on a very deep level. Today's class is a little bit more abstract. I mean, I do use a lot of case studies in all my classes, and I bring in people's personal charts if they give me permission, because I think we can relate to Jyotish if we understand how the principle that we're learning today relates to the class. I can't do that today. I don't have your charts, and so I'll either bring in my chart or a famous person's chart like John Kennedy as a case study. But for the most, I don't do as many case studies in the first class, but we have to use a lot of case studies in general. Again, I'll take questions later, and I'll offer a chance for you to answer questions. You can type them in. It's hard for me to keep an eye on them on GoToWebinar, but when we pause, I will take questions. Sometimes people come and they want me to do their chart and ask about their Dasha and what their chart means on these in these classes, and it's just really not something I can do, because whenever you evaluate somebody's Dasha, you have to look at 10 or 15 things sometimes, and I don't want to throw out anything casual or something wrong in a brief comment, particularly when I don't know your chart. So those questions are not really welcome. But and sometimes people ask questions that are out of context to the class, and I suggest that you save your questions for things that we've brought up, or questions about dashas and things like that. My teaching style is, I'm very kind of clear. I put out very kind of coherent PowerPoints. I do kind of give a lot of material out, and I do kind of, often people need to kind of, the ideal class is kind of like a college class. You may get an assigned reading, or in this case, you often get the PowerPoints ahead of time. You read over them, then you hear the talk, and then you can ask questions. And sometimes with Jyotish, you have to kind of sometimes go back and hear the talk a second time. Jyotish is kind of very deep in that level. James Braha, I just heard him speak at the Sedona Vedic Astrology Conference, said, when he first learned Jyotish, he went to these evening meetings with a tutor, and he tape recorded the whole thing, and it just kind of flew by him. And then he spent the next day kind of listening to the recording, and then he'd go back and ask questions. And that's kind of the ideal way to kind of study Jyotish. I mean, you can just show up to any class and kind of listen to it and casually pick up whatever you can, but it does require something to go a little bit deeper. Let me just give a couple. So the actual class, the next class will be Saturday, February 29th at noon. If I get a lot of international people, noon is about 10:30 at night in India. If I get a lot of international students from India, which sometimes happens, I can move class up a little bit so that it doesn't get too late for people. The classes are always recorded, so you can always listen to them at your own pace whenever you want, and the recordings are usually available 2 or 3 hours after the live class. Again, the first class will run 10 weeks through May 2nd, and then part 2 will start May 9th and run through July, and each class is $195, and many people have signed up and just paid for both at once. Shameless plug, most of you know my book, Finding Your Blind Spots Using Vedic Astrology. It's on Amazon. It's available on my website. I do have a new book out. It's a mini book for those of you who don't like short reads. It's 53 pages on the mysteries of Saturn and Capricorn, mastering their energies for growth and transformation. I do have it's on my website now for download. For those of you who'd like to learn more about Saturn, I'm expanding. This part 1, I released it early. I have to write another 150 pages on Saturn dashas and transits and houses and signs and nakshatras and Atmakaraka positions, but that's coming. Just kind of a shameless plug here. And I will be co-teaching a class with Andrew Frost and Pandit Samavedala on Vedic remedies starting March 7th at 3 p.m. Pacific time. And it's a mini class on remedies for finance, relationship, health, and career, and trying to continue this merging of working with Vedic pundits and to come up with and also making things kind of accessible with case studies too. So we have that coming up. And many of you know me, I'll be speaking again in Sedona. So let's go to today's material. For those of you who can't take the Dasha course live, My classes are available at Applied Vedic Astrology under the course tab. Sometimes they're on sale and you can watch them at their own leisure, and they're fairly inexpensive for the way things go. Okay, let's go to today's material. It's a chart. Okay, so what I want to do today is give an overview of the class, but we will learn some basic things also, and then we will continue in a couple weeks for those of you who continue with the course. I have an overview of the course on the website. You can look at it. I don't need to go over it. I don't want to do too much. So let me tell you a little bit about my background with Dasha specifically. I have this I started studying Vedic astrology in 1987, and I was applying it to finance initially. I mean, I certainly worked with people also, but I was interested in the astrology of markets, and I at that time the software wasn't very good, and I remember calculating dashas on 5 levels by hand, and really kind of learning how to do that. And when you spend that much time, I mean, as you know, the ancient, when you became a Jyotishi, you were usually an apprentice, and you actually had to do all these hand calculations and be good at math for your master, and you would spend 2 or 3 years doing that. And and that's somehow how Jyotish kind of went into the consciousness. And I think it's because I worked with Jyotish on that level that a lot of stuff happened by osmosis. But and I was able to rectify my own chart on 5 levels of dashas. And I actually have a lesson on teaching you how to do that. I think because if you want to use dashas in a very practical way, you can actually understand your dashas on the 5th level, the 4th and 5th levels, and seeing what's actually manifesting in your life. And the most concrete level of what happens in your life is happening on levels 4 and 5. And you can actually see, if you get your chart rectified, you can actually see how the 5th level dasha is manifesting every day. So it's quite interesting. I have a lesson on that. It's something that no one I know in the Jyotish community does. It's just I got into it because I had to time financial markets to the day, and unless you had the dashas rectified to 5 levels, you couldn't really get any accurate predictive information. So but now so that's how I started out studying dashas in 1987, and now I'm kind of just intrigued with simpler systems and alternative things, because I think for those of you who work with dashas, sometimes they just don't work and they're kind of complicated. Vimshotri Dasha, which is the king of dashas, which we'll talk about today in an overview, is what's generally used, but it doesn't always work. And I'll show you my chart real quickly. I mean, I got married in my Moon Saturn period, and first of Jyotish, I mean, it's really hard to predict. And but it was much easier with some of the alternative systems and the Rashi dashas, which we'll talk about a little bit today, just to give you an overview. So now I'm kind of intrigued by how can we simplify dasha analysis for people who can't learn all these complicated rules, so that you can actually use it and it could be meaningful. And also, how can it be meaningful for yourself? And so I'm always trying to bring Vedic astrology down from an academic level to kind of a simple level, and at the same time I am an academic, so I kind of end up being rather scholarly about everything I do. I've been told that's a problem for a lot of people. Now the word, let's see if I can enlarge this. The word dasha is actually often mispronounced, and after 30 years of saying dasha, I'm not going to be able to catch myself. The Sanskrit is actually pronounced dasha. Dasha. So just about no one, including my professional peers, use that. But when you say dashas, you're really kind of Americanizing, and it's kind of also a little bit cruel. So the correct pronunciation is dasha, and it's kind of funny, because no one ever does that, uses it. So and after 30 years, I just won't be able to do that myself. So, but anyway, there's two kinds of nakshatra dashas. I'll try it here. There's two major kinds of dashas. They're called nakshatra dashas, which impact how we feel, and that impacts our decisions. And, you know, Vedic astrologers have always been fascinated by the moon. And, you know, you go to India, they ask you your moon sign and your moon nakshatra, because it's the mental and emotional level that is particularly important. In the West, maybe there's a little bit more emphasis on the ascendant and the sun sign even, you know, which is what Western astrology developed out of, because it represents the material world. And in the West, we're a little bit more interested in the material world. So Vimshottari Dasha, you know, is calculated from the moon, is calculated from what nakshatra our moon we were born into. So if we were born into, I was born into Jeshta, I was born with moon in Scorpio and Jeshta nakshatra, and so I started my life in a Mercury period, and my sequence of dasha goes in order from there. So Rashi dasha, nakshatra dashas, and there's like 10 or 12 major ones, are all connected to the emotion and the mind and how we feel. Now the Rashi dashas, and there's probably another 20 of those. There's supposedly 32 dasha systems, and they're conditional. Rashi dashas are based on signs, and they impact the manifest level of existence, and they're calculated from the movement of the sun. So of course, we know the sun and the moon are the essence of everything in Vedic astrology, but the Rashi dashas, which govern kind of more the material level of existence, you know, are calculated and connected more to the sun. And so the one that I'm going to teach in part 2 of the class is called Chara Dasha, which was talked about a lot by K.N. Rao. And your Rashi dashas are the one, there are all these rules for calculating them. Luckily, we have computers to do it now. Even freeware does it, like Jagannatha Hora. So Chara dasha is calculated from what your rising sign is, birth. So I was Scorpio rising, so I started my my life in a Scorpio period. And then if you're an even sign, Scorpio is 8, so it's an even sign, then it goes counterclockwise. So I then went into a Libra period and a Virgo period and a Leo period and a Cancer period, and now I'm in a Pisces period. So it rotates counterclockwise. If you're born in an odd sign like Aries or Gemini, then you start rotating. If you're born, if you're Gemini rising, then your periods would start Gemini, Cancer, Leo, etc. So to me, Rashi dashas have been so fascinating because they're so much easier to kind of predict one's life and material events. And most of the time people want to know when they're going to get married or when they're going to get a job promotion, and when you know, and you can see that so much easier in the Rashi dashas. So we'll spend 4 or 5 weeks with those in part 2. Let's see, let me move on. You know, one of the problems is that, you know, prediction is very difficult from Vimshottari Dasha. I mean, and you'll see, even we'll go over some basic rules today. There are a lot of them, and then you know, to really get a good prediction, you really have to, on a material level, you have to really kind of be pretty intuitive about it. And then the Vimshottari Dasha may even tell you how the person's feeling. You know, a person, everybody dreads Saturn now, but you know, so, and Saturn just never feels happy. So even if you're Taurus or Libra rising and Saturn's the best planet for you, your Saturn period, you know, is going to feel, you know, you're going to complain, you're going to work hard, and you're going to feel Saturn usually. But you know, I had a friend, she was a Taurus rising, and she went into her Saturn dasha, and she got all depressed, you know, because she'd gone, you know, anytime you go from Jupiter period to Saturn period, you know, it's like the floor comes out, because you're feeling happy and expansive in Jupiter, and then suddenly Saturn hits, and it's like, you know, you feel depressed and anxious, and you're complaining a lot and things like that. And so she lost her job at the end of her Jupiter period, and she got so depressed that she stayed in her room in her home, and she said, you know, I'm not even bothered looking for a job. Nobody wants me. I'm not worth anything. All those type of things that Saturn brings up. I'm not good enough and things like that. So subjectively, even for a Taurus rising, she was feeling really down, and it's a subjective level of the Dasha. And then somebody knocked on her door and offered her, I live in a small town where people know each other, and they, couldn't get a hold of her. And they came to her door and they offered her this really great job that turned into like, she's really just a kind of a, major kind of manager and really skilled, talented person. And they just came to her door and they offered this really great job, and she got this really great job. So anyway, there's always this kind of subjective, objective energy going on in our charts, how we feel, which is more reflected in Vimshotri Dasha, and what kind of manifests in our lives in Rashi Dasha. So I gave an example, of Vimshotri with her, but I'd have to check her chart Dasha, but I don't have permission to use her chart. So, but sometimes you get, ideally you want to use both dashas, Vimshotri and Rashi dashas, because you can double check your predictions. And lately I always start with Chara Dasha because it's so much more easier to kind of predict what's going to happen. And then I kind of, will back it up. And sometimes we run, our lives are a little bit incoherent sometimes. I mean, sometimes things work on the material level for us, but we feel badly. I mean, I'm running a K2 period on, I'm in a Rahu K2 period now, which is kind of a tricky period. But and K2 always wants to kind of drop everything. It wants to drop, whenever you go through K2, you want to quit your job, you want to sell your house, you want to go off into the forest and meditate, you want to change relationships, you want to withdraw from the world. And so, subjectively, K2 is going to do that. And usually people follow how they're feeling, and they go into a K2 period and they let go of something that may be important to them. But on the Rashi Dasha level, they could be running a 10th house Rashi Dasha, that might indicate promotion and career, and that actually may happen. But they may still feel like they want to leave their job because the moon, the Nakshatra Dasha, kind of connects, makes them feel like, okay, I need to let go of this job. No one loves me, no one cares about me. But they get promoted and they get a raise, so there's this often a dichotomy going on. It's good to understand that dichotomy because sometimes these I wrote a whole book on blind spots. Sometimes we're kind of blinded by our feelings and what we think, and we're just wrong. And it's like my friend, I'm not good enough, and she's in a Saturn period, no one loves me, and she gets this great job, so it's good to kind of understand both levels. So a lot of things we're going to cover today, but I'm going to go over kind of basic principles so you all learn something, but we also still need to flesh all these out. So we'll be going deeper into kind of all these things. So basics, some of you, I've got 18 people now. I'm kind of curious, everybody has like a different background. So most of you know Vimshotri Dasha, and it's based on the nakshatra of the moon that you're born into, and then you start a sequence in order. So the Vimshotri Dasha goes, Sun, Moon, Mars, Rahu, Jupiter, Saturn, Mercury, K2, Venus, and then, if you live more than 120 years, which doesn't happen anymore, you would go back to your Sun period. And again, where you start your Dasha is based on where your moon was when you were born. And I was born in Jestha, which is a nakshatra owned by Mercury, and I was born with the moon a couple degrees away from at the very end of Jestha. So the calculations, which if you learn how to do them in hand, would suggest that I was born at the end of the Dasha. So I had like 4 years of my Mercury Dasha, and then I went into K2, and then I went into Venus. So you can kind of, this is the sequence, these are the number of years, and it's important to kind of learn the sequence because the sequence also happens on a small level. This is basic. So the other interesting thing that you can all take home with you, if you're just kind of an armchair person interested in Jyotish, is the combination of the Dasha and the Bhukti. The Bhukti is the sub-period that you're running The combination, one of the things that, no one taught me this, but I just noticed it over the years, is that, again, because dashas are emotional, the combination of the two planets will tell you something about the nature of how you feel in that period. So if you're running a Rahu Saturn period, I've just been through that 3 or 4 years back, you're always a little anxious and always a little paranoid because Rahu and Saturn, even if they're good planets, I have an exalted Saturn, it really helps save the Dasha. My Rahu is well placed also, but it was still, I was always anxious, I was always paranoid, and Rahu Saturn by nature is a workaholic energy. If you have Rahu conjunct Saturn in the chart, you're kind of a workaholic, you're kind of running around. So very easy to predict in a Rahu Saturn period for anybody that they're going to feel a little bit more anxious and a little bit paranoid and be a little bit of in a workaholic mode and kind of run around like a crazy man trying to do too much because of that energy. And so you can just understand that. Now a Moon Venus period, because they're usually, even if they're not well placed, because Moon and Venus are kind of the emotional, kind of sexual, sensual female planets. There's this happy, usually more of a happy, expansive, sensual, and emotional energy to it. So my Moon Venus period, my Venus Moon period, which I went through, and my Moon Venus period, did have those kind of qualities to them. In terms of how you felt, but what actually manifested, again, may be dependent on all kinds of other things. And then like a Moon Saturn period, whenever you see Saturn Moon or Moon Saturn, people get to, that combination in a chart usually is depression, dejection, emotional dryness, anxiety, so whenever you have those combinations coming up, you're going to get, they're just difficult periods. So certain dashas, again, dashas, are emotionally just difficult because if you just look up what the conjunction means, in Bill Levicy's book, what happens when Mars and Venus are conjunct, there's a lot of passion, there's a lot of energy toward, dance and expression of sensual and sexual energy and things like that. So you go into Mars-Venus period or Venus-Mars period, there's just a lot of kind of passion going to happen just because the nature of those two planets in conjunction would create that. So the subjective pairing of the Dasha and Bhukti lords will show you kind of how you're going to feel, and so you can always look that up. And it's not, I'm simplifying it because I'm trying to, I get scholars taking these kind of previews, and I get people who just want to learn a little bit more about their charts. I'm trying to help everybody out here. Now, one of the things that you have to learn, and I have 4 or 5 people signed up for this class already, and for those of you who are signed up watching, you have to kind of memorize certain material from the beginning so that you can immediately judge dashas. And I'm not going to go through this now. Again, I call this kind of cookbook material. Sometimes you just have to sit down and get your flashcards out and just memorize certain things so that it's there at the top of your head. So for example, the one thing, again, I'm not going to go through all of this, but this is an example of what you have to learn. You have to know what are the good planets are for each rising sign and how they function. So for Aries rising, Mars rules the 1st and the 8th, and even though Mars rules the 8th house, for Aries rising, it's a good thing. It's a good thing. It's not, it's not that typical 8th house difficulty because it's the chart lord. Saturn is a challenging planet for Aries rising because it owns the 11th and the 12th house. The 11th house is not just the house of gains, it's also connected to health problems and problems with groups, and there's a lot of problems with the 11th house. And the 12th house always brings expenditure and sacrifice and things like that. So Saturn is a difficult planet for Aries, so Saturn period is usually, generally difficult. Mercury is the most difficult planet for Aries because it owns the 3rd and the 6th houses, which create a lot of sexual energy and a lot of kind of problems with enemies and health issues. Venus is also a difficult planet for Aries because it's a Marika. It owns the 2nd and the 7th houses, so it can create health problems, or if you're meant to die late in life, your Venus could be a killing period. Sun's the best planet for Aries. It owns the 5th house. Jupiter's mixed, but generally good, owning the 9th and the 12th house. And then the ruler of Aquarius, Rahu or Saturn, is the Bodhikish planet, which can cause problems. So you have to kind of memorize all these kind of good and I don't ever like to use the word good or bad planets, but you have to know, this is something you have to know at the top of your head to do Dasha analysis. So people who are signed up for the class, please memorize the following slides starting with number 15. Now, other things that you kind of have to know about dashas is, so the way dashas work, if a planet is in a house or if it owns houses, it will bring up those issues. And there's, certainly more complicated rules. So planets in the 2nd or the 7th or owning the 2nd or the 7th, those are Marka houses. Marka means death inflicting, but death inflicting only happens like if, in your period that you're supposed to die, like in your 80s. But Marka period will cause illness. So if a person's in their 30s and there's it's an indication that they'll live a long life. Marka period, 7th house period, 2nd house period, planets in the 2nd or the 7th, maybe a period of illness. Another key word to remember, Yogacaraka. Yogacaraka is the best planet it's the planet owning an angle and a trine. And it's always good. There's always, always is one of those words you never want to use in Jyotish because you always have to qualify everything a million times. But so like Saturn and Venus have that wonderful relationship. So Libra and Taurus rising, Saturn's the Yogacaraka planet, Venus, Capricorn rising, Aquarius rising, Venus is the Yogacaraka planet. So, it's good to know those. And then, Sun and Moon also, Mars is the Yogacaraka planet. So good thing to remember because Yogacaraka dashas are generally going to be good if, we certainly have to qualify that. Another key thing you have to sometimes know when evaluating a period, and we'll go over this later, is there a Bodhika influence? Now, Bodhika, I'll go over this later. Bodhika is kind of a hidden karmic shadow. It's connected to kind of 9th house lords for fixed signs like Scorpio, dual signs. The 7th house lord is a problem, so they have relationship problems. I'll go over that a little bit later, but it's good to remember that. And the chart lord is, is always, the 1st house lord is always good, but it still has, can have problems. The problem with Vedic astrology is, we rarely get these kind of black and whites, where something is 100% good or 100% bad. We always get like 1,000 shades of gray. And, Vedic astrology is kind of learning to discriminate how much white there is and how much black there is. And life is always kind of mixed like that. So in Vedic astrology, you're going to get a lot of mixed things, and that's the essence of what you have to figure out. So again, people taking the class, you'll get a copy of the slides, and definitely if you don't know what planet, what sign, and all the planets connected to that sign, you just have to memorize that. It's very important, and I'm not going to waste class doing that now. So I want to go over some of the keys to Dasha analysis that are fleshed out in future lessons. I will maybe pause for a second and take questions. Now, to do this, I may have to unmute you all, and so only one person could talk at a time. So I'm going to try unmuting you all. So if you have a quick question on anything that I've covered, you should be able to turn your orange mic green and speak, and only one person at a time if you have a question. I haven't really covered anything significant for you to have questions, but I just wanted to see.
I do have one.
Okay, go ahead. Thank you.
So my name's MJ. Hi.
Hi.
There's a raise your hand thing, by the way. You probably know that.
Yeah.
That might be of use. So I'm just trying to understand about the Lagna. So you said when Aries is the Lagna, then the 1st and the 8th houses are significant. So if, let's say, Sagittarius were the Lagna, would it be the 1st and 4th because that would be ruled by the same ruler?
Right, yeah. Well,
Thank you.
Yes, thank you. So planets always kind of bring their brother with them. So if a planet owns one house, it automatically kind of brings the other one with, and they're kind of, and you often find Sagittarius is, if person owns the first and the fourth, they're kind of really into real estate actually, or home remodeling, because Jupiter owns the first and the fourth, and it's just they're very connected to the fourth house because it's themselves, So that's, yeah, it's a good question. Thank you. Other quick questions? Okay. Okay, so let's move on. I'm going to unmute you all again. I think, okay, so you're, okay. Okay, so let's learn some basic things that you always have to look at for Dasha analysis. And I'm kind of throwing out major principles, and like we may have to spend an hour on each one of these principles in a future class and go over case studies and look at your charts with them. But we have to kind of start getting an overview, and that's what we're doing today. So one of the basic things you have to think about is the Dasha ruler a benefic or malefic? I mean, a basic question. So Jupiter, Venus, and Mercury are the benefics. Mercury can sometimes have a malefic influence if it's too connected to Saturn, Mars, Rahu. Moon is a benefic often if it, but it, depending on, its associations. But the quality of how you feel, is going to be, very impacted by just is the Dasha ruler benefic or malefic. So Jupiter periods feel expansive, Venus periods feel great, so Saturn periods usually don't feel so good, but you can still have good things happen. So I mean, it's kind of a basic thing to remember, but it's important to understand. And malefics sometimes get a lot of bad shrift because they think we're kind of just meant to have all kinds of suffering. And I always look at malefics as like high school coaches or army sergeants. They're kind of they are ultimately there to do something good for you. It may not be very pleasant the way they help you grow. We might hate our gym coach, but he helped us huff at the finish line, and we won the marathon and got the blue ribbon, and we got a scholarship to college, and our whole life turned around because of that. So malefics have that ability. They're not just there to inflict horrible suffering on you. So you have to also understand that when you're in a Saturn period or a Mars period or a Rahu period, you have to understand what the nature of those planets are and how they're helping you grow. Rahu periods teach us, to be ethical, and that we're always cutting corners if Rahu's afflicted in the chart. Rahu periods teach us, about the nature of desire and ambition and cravings. And if we don't understand the subjective nature, we get lost. So one of the things, we're going to have a whole 2 lessons on understanding what I call the Karaka nature of the planets. I mean, you have to understand what Jupiter means on a very deep level, and what Jupiter Dasha means, for most people, and how Jupiter Dasha is different for a Taurus than it is for an Aries, because Jupiter is kind of is a bad planet for Libra and Taurus, and so it may have a subjective coloring. It may make us falsely optimistic, and we think everything's going to be wonderful, but it isn't. And I had a friend who's a Taurus rising. He was in a Jupiter period, and he was always happy, and he was always wonderful to be around, and he was always optimistic. And he said, oh, my job's going to go great, and we get a raise, and my relationship's going to just kind of blossom, and it was false optimism. None of that happened because Jupiter owns the 8th and the 11th. So subjectively, Jupiter made him feel good. Objectively, it wasn't going to produce results. So you have to kind of really understand how that works in Vedic astrology. So you don't want the Dasha ruler usually, there are all these exceptions. Unfortunately, Vedic astrology is encyclopedic. The Dasha ruler in the 6th, 8th, or the 12th house, or associated with the lords of the 6th, 8th, or the 12th, is usually going to cause some problems. Now, for those of you who've taken my Secrets of the Houses class, there are good things that can happen in the 8th house and the 12th house and the 6th house also. They're not all horribly bad, but you have to kind of, you know, you have to understand them. And sometimes people talk about these Virpit Raj yogas. You have Lord of the 6th and the 8th, or Lord of the 8th and the 6th. And, you know, if you learn Vedic astrology, they say, oh, that's a good yoga. Well, is it, you know, what usually happens, Lord of the 6th and the 8th, you know, you have an accident and you end up in the hospital and you get all this insurance money, you know, and you get out of debt because, you know, you had this accident, but you were in the hospital for 4 weeks, you know. Is that good? You know, that's why I don't like using the word good, but for you know, you can have those situations. So anyway, dashas of the 6th, 8th, or 12th, you know, aren't always bad either, but you have to kind of, you know, you have to remember you're going to bring up issues. So you have to look at kind of subtle advanced things in Vedic astrology. I don't know if we're going to get to study all of these, but if the dasha lord is connected to the Gulika. Gulika is the son of Saturn. It's kind of a upagraha. It's connected to, causes lots of problems. So you don't want the dasha lord connected to Gulika. You don't want it connected to a Bhadakash planet. You don't want it in the 64th Navamsha, the 22nd Navamsha. These are advanced things that we will cover at some point. I'm just bringing these rules out. You know, we're going to have 2 lessons on dashas and Varga charts in part 2, and you know, Vargas to me are everything, and I've got 2 classes on my website if you want to study them, and there's a 3rd dasha class Varga class coming. You know, sometimes things look good in the Rashi chart, but they don't manifest because the Varga chart isn't showing that they'll happen, or sometimes things don't look good in the Rashi chart and they're good in the dasha, in the Varga charts, and they may manifest after hard work or something like that. But you have to kind of, you know, you have to look at, you can do a lot with dashas in the Varga charts, and you can look at some of the traditional things that people look at. There's all these, Parashara taught all the mathematics of Varga charts, Vimshopaka, Shadbala, Ashtaka Varga, which is another system. Those actually can tell us things about the quality of a dasha period. Again, I can't go into details. I'm just kind of giving overview, but something to kind of look at here. I could give an example of that, but I'm not going to do that just this second because I don't want to get lost. Is the dasha lord exalted or debilitated? If you've read my books and articles, you know, the word exalted and the word debilitated get misunderstood and overused. I mean, debilitated, I kind of want to strike them out of the Vedic astrology vocabulary. Debilitated makes you tell somebody that you've got a debilitated Venus, they feel like they're in a wheelchair or something like that. And you know, you have to explain what that means. You know, when Venus is debilitated, it has trouble with relationships. It's too critical. It may be too sexual and not interested in creating great art. So you know, it has to work 3 times as hard at relationship to make things work. So you have to kind of, you know, whenever you talk about exalted or debilitated planets, you have to kind of explain what they mean. And sometimes exalted planets are a problem. Exalted malefics are too strong. You have an exalted Mars for the wrong rising sign, you know, he may, you know, I had a friend, unfortunately, who passed on because she went into her Mars period. She had an exalted Mars in the 8th house. 8th house is connected to death and unfortunate events. And in her Mars period, Mars is not a good planet for Gemini. She was murdered. And it was horrific, you know, to go through that. But I mean, obviously for us, you know, we were left behind. But you know, exalted planets aren't always good. You know, so you have to understand the laws of exalted and debilitated planets. But exalted dashas usually bring results, even if because they're 3 times as strong. And so it's usually pretty good to have an exalted dasha, but not always. A debilitated dasha doesn't mean in the end of the world. So, you know, it's very complicated. Now, this is kind of a subtle level law. You know, the dasha lord should not be in the 6th, 8th, or the 12th house from the signs it rules. So For example, so if you're in a Saturn period and Saturn's in governs Capricorn, and Leo, and you've got Saturn in Leo, then even though that might be your third house for a Gemini, and you think, oh, I've got a Dasha period coming of Saturn in the third house, because Saturn is 8 houses from Leo, it's going to cause 8th house issues. And I experienced this. I'll show you my chart. And Heart to Foe told me this, and I didn't understand it enough at the time. Here's my chart, and I'm sorry, I've got some of you I know like Northern. I use both. I like Southern lately, but let's see. Here's the Northern. So here's my Sun period. Here's my chart. I've got Lord of the 10th and the 5th here. Scorpio rising. Leo owns the 10th. Lord of the 10th and 5th. Now that's generally, you would say that would be a really good period. But the Sun is 8 houses from Leo. So a lot of people, I was into Vedic astrology when and a lot of people told me, oh, you're gonna have a great period and da 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 da. And it wasn't a picnic. Actually, I was building my financial business at the time. I struggled, I worked really hard, and it wasn't until my moon period that my business really kind of took off. But my Sun period, because the Sun is 8 houses from Leo, it has some, we'd say dosha, it has some flaw in it. And even though it's Lord of the 10th and the 5th, it's in Jupiter's nakshatra, and there's all kinds of things that we could say that were good about it. In the Navamsha chart, it moves 5 houses from Pisces to Cancer. There are all kinds of things that it should have, there are a lot of wonderful things about that period, but it wasn't particularly great for 10th house matters, elevation and status at work. It just didn't happen. So sometimes you have to, it's kind of a subtle principle, but you have to kind of remember it. Aspects to the Mahadasha Lord. So, planetary aspects can impact a house in a Dasha period quite a bit. So let's say you've got a great Venus period going on. You think your marriage is going to be great, and Venus is well placed in Pisces and stuff like that. But there's a 7th house malefic aspect of Mars, onto Venus, or and so Mars in the 7th house can easily create fights and divorce and all kinds of problems in marriage. And so suddenly, it doesn't matter how good and well placed your Venus period is, and if it has a Mars aspect, maybe even a sneaky 4th or an 8th house aspect, it may, it may cause problems and lead to divorce. So aspects are very important in Mahadasha analysis. I don't know if I have an example in my chart. Let me look real quickly. Well, I do have one. Okay, my moon period, which ran 1992 to 2002. Now, if you looked at it, it's Lord of the 9th, Cancer rising. It's in the 1st house. Okay, there are a lot of wonderful things that happened in my moon period. 9th house Lord in the 1st, a very good placement. There are a lot of problems also. It's got a Mars aspect. So Mars in Aries is aspecting the moon. Now, there's a positive yoga for this, but in a sense, it was, I was kind of very sick this whole moon period. Now, I would also be sick because it's the dasha of a debilitated moon, but the Mars aspect, even though it's on its own house, wasn't that helpful. I think it really caused a lot, it wasn't that helpful. So aspects will be very kind of important to the nature of a dasha. I could even think, just looking at now, I'm in a Rahu period. Now I've got this Saturn aspect onto Rahu. It's not helping this Rahu period at all. Jupiter's trying to come to the rescue here. It probably helps, but it's Saturn aspect's not helping. So you always have to kind of look at those sneaky aspects. Boudica. Now I mentioned this earlier. For those of you who haven't studied with me before and you haven't studied Boudica, I'll send you an extra tape if we get to this section. Boudica shows kind of hidden shadow, deep karmic issues. You go into a Boudica period, you know, you think it's going to perform, but it doesn't. So like the Boudica is, for fixed signs, the 9th house lord is Boudica. So that's Taurus, Aquarius, Leo, and Scorpio are the fixed signs. So Boudica periods bring up 9th house issues, problems with father, problems with guru, problems with religion, problem with travel. So even though it's the lord of the 9th house, for Scorpio, it's going to bring in some Boudica influence. And Sanjay Ross sometimes says if there's two or more malefics connected to a Boudica planet, you know, it's kind of even a curse. Now, so there's different levels of Boudica. It just can be, to me, sometimes it's just an archetypal quality, like the dual signs, which are the corner, those of you all know dual signs, hopefully. Dual signs are, you know, the corners of the chart here, Gemini, Virgo, Sagittarius, and Pisces. The dual signs, the 7th house is a Boudica issue, and they always have problems with business partners or relationships when a 7th house period comes up, or it can create health issues. So, you know, you always have to remember a Boudica influence. If the Boudica planet is badly afflicted, so in this case, let's say, I have a Boudica issue in, let's look at Kennedy's chart. Actually, I think he does. Son of Kennedy, Virgo rising. His Boudica planet was Jupiter, because he's a dual sign, Virgo rising. And it's a Marca planet. And he's got it between the 8th and the 9th houses here. It's just right on the cusp here. It's kind of weak. Any planet kind of that close to the edge of a chart is not real happy. And it's not a good planet for Virgos. And he had all these kind of problems with affairs, and he had all kinds of serious health issues too, as you know. He got assassinated in his Jupiter period. He got elected during his Rahu period, which is, you know, Rahu's doing really well here. But but anyway, the Jupiter has a Boudica influence in this chart, and it's not helpful for him. It's afflicted by the Sun. Venus is helping it a little bit, but again, it didn't have problems with relationships. So Boudica can have an influence on a period, and then we'll have to study that. So basic things that you're always looking at in dashas for dasha analysis is the planet exalted in its own sign and its a friend sign. So, you know, this is Jyotish 101 that all of you know. You have this ranking, you know, exalted, Mula Trikuna, own sign, friend sign, you know, enemy sign, great enemy sign, debilitated, you know, so you have this kind of gradation. And, you know, the quality of the dasha will be impacted by all those things. You know, those are basic things that you've all learned. You always want to see is, you know, planets that get placed in Kendras, the 1st, 4th, 7th, or 10th houses, or trines, the 5th and 9th house, usually do pretty well in their dashas. You know, we usually like the dashas of planets in the 2nd and the 11th houses because they bring gains, but they may bring other problems. And dashas of the 3rd, 6th, and the 8th and the 12th houses usually bring problems. The 3rd house is not as neutral as people think, particularly in the Varga charts. And so, but in any case, this is kind of a simplification of things. And as I said, there's like 1,000 rules that you always have to apply. Let's look at nakshatra lords. The nakshatra of your dasha ruler will impact your dasha, and its lord and the planets and houses connected to in your chart will be important. So for example, if you're in a Jupiter period, but Jupiter's in Saturn's nakshatra of Pusha. Now Pusha is generally an auspicious nakshatra. You could even say, you know, Saturn's exactly exalted at 5 degrees in Pusha, but let's say it's later Pusha. But let's say it's a Cancer rising chart, and that means Saturn owns the 6th and the 7th houses. And let's say Saturn's in Aries. So if the nakshatra lord is debilitated, nakshatras are everything in Vimshottri Dasha. The nakshatra lord is debilitated, that Saturn period, particularly for a Cancer rising, if it owned the 6th and the 7th houses, that exalted Jupiter period, which should be good for a Cancer rising, may suddenly lose its energy and have all kinds of problems. Again, we have to look at case studies for all of these, and you can see, I'll bring them up, but it's kind of like that. The nakshatra lord is very important. So, for example, in my chart, let's look at my chart again. Okay, I'm in a Rahu period now. Rahu's in Mula Nakshatra, which is owned by Ketu. So it turns out, it's kind of a really kind of mixed period. It's been kind of a difficult period, Rahu period for me usually are. But Rahu is in Ketu's Nakshatra. Ketu, the Nakshatra lord, is in the 8th house, which is always, filled with kind of unexpected things. It's with a stationary Jupiter. So my Jupiter is saving Rahu and Ketu here, but it's not without its kind of like anxiety and trepidation with the Saturn aspect on it. But the in this case again, the what nakshatra is the Dasha lord in? It's in Mula. It's going to bring in some of the energies of Mula. Mula has this kind of quality of kind of taking things away, taking material things away. And I went into my Rahu period in 2009. I got hit by the housing crisis. All my money was in real estate. Housing market crashed in Sedona 50%, and I gave up my house rather than pay an increased mortgage and have all kinds of problems. It's kind of a tragedy. It happened in my Rahu period, but it's that kind of influence of Ketu also. Ketu being in the 8th, Ketu ruling Rahu. So you always have to look at where the ruler of the Dasha Lord is in. My moon period was also problematic because it was in Mars's nakshatra. I'm sorry, it was in Mercury's nakshatra of Jesja. It's at 26 degrees here. And so it brought in 8th and 11th house energies. Now it's in the 4th. And so I think there were a lot of, did move a lot during my moon period. I didn't really have stable housing for some, I remember I'm just looking back during that period. And certainly Mercury here in the 4th, Lord of the 8th and the 11th is bringing, in some of those energies to the moon. So the nakshatra that the Dasha Lord is placed, and the houses that it owns and the house that it's in will have an influence on the Dasha. And you have to, it's really why people get Dashas wrong, because they don't look at the nakshatra Lord and where it's placed. I just went over this already, so I'm just repeating it, but it's the same thing. Like if you're in a Cancer, you're a Cancer rising, you've got Jupiter and let's say you have it in Pisces, even in Saturn's nakshatra, but Saturn owns the 6th and the 7th, and Saturn is placed in Aries. It's just not going to be a great Jupiter period, even though it's in Cancer. I mean, you just see this, you talk to people. I'm just doing this with years experience. I mean, people almost never get what they think their Dasha is going to bring them. It's very funny, because that's why these rules of Dasha get so convoluted unless you really learn the secrets of how to predict them. They always come out wrong. And it's very difficult to kind of get them right. And people come to me and they say, oh, I don't understand why I'm suffering so much. I'm in this Jupiter period and Jupiter's well placed, and then you can see it, but it's also always in our head, because nakshatra dashas are mental and emotional, and if we wail on about how we feel all the time and we can't ignore that, then we may not even appreciate all the wonderful things that may be objectively happening. Nakshatras of Rahu and Ketu are always difficult. So you put a planet in a Rahu, you have a dasha of a planet in Rahu or Ketu's nakshatra. There's 6 of them. They're always going to bring up deep subconscious patterns, deep karmic life influences. Rahu wants to be ambitious and get attention. Ketu wants to give up everything. I have probably the most complicated dasha of my life now, because I have Rahu in Ketu's nakshatra of Mula. I have Ketu and Rahu's nakshatra of Rahu. I'm in a Rahu Ketu period starting January. And emotionally, it's bringing up a lot of subconscious grunge, because it's bringing up Rahu and Ketu. And for those of you who know transits, you know Rahu is going to be going over my natal Ketu in April, and Ketu is going to be going over my natal Rahu. So I should have a life-changing experience in April. I can kind of predict what it's going to be, but it's, you can see sometimes how, the subjective influence can kind of really kind of hit you. Now, in lesson 9, we're going to look at lessons 9 and 10. We're going to look at nakshatras and dashas, and there are all these kind of advanced rules that you can do with them. I mean, nakshatras are everything for Vimshottari dasha. If the dasha, for those of you who know timing with Tarabala, usually you don't want dashas connected to the 1st, 3rd, 5th, and 7th position from the natal moon. So this is, again, I get all kinds of people on these free classes. So my natal moon is Jeshya, and so there's a system when you study nakshatras. If you count from the natal moon is considered position 1. So Rahu's in my 2nd nakshatra for my natal moon. 2s are good. Next nakshatra is Purvashadha. That would be a 3. 3s are always difficult. 4 is Uttarashadha. I've got Saturn going through Uttarashadha now in transit. It's a better position for my moon. But I have Venus in Shravana here. So Venus is 5 positions away from my natal moon. So my Venus period, which is actually a very difficult period. Normally people look forward to their Venus periods. It's filled with pleasure and luxury and all these things. My Venus period was very, very difficult for me, and partly because it's 5 positions away from the moon. So when we study nakshatras and Nadi nakshatra, you can tell something about the dasha period. This is a very simplified thing. You can study something very profoundly based on the Nadi position of the nakshatra lord. So that's very important. Lessons 11 and 12 in part 2, we have to look at Vargas, because Vargas, you can actually do a lot of really good dasha prediction from the Vargas, and it's very important to understand Vargas and how to predict from Vargas, and we'll spend 2 lessons on that. I've also done that in my Varga class. And the way this works is, obviously not every period is bad for everything in your life. I mean, once in a while that happens, but, let's say you go into a Saturn period and you're worried about it, but if you look at Saturn in the Varga periods, the Varga charts, you see, well, it's exalted in the 10th house in your career chart. So maybe you get, with hard work, you get a raise at work. Or let's say it's in the 9th house in your the 7th house in Libra in the marriage chart. You might have a very good long-lasting marriage come out of that in your Saturn period. So the Vargas, the position of your Dasha Lord and its relationship to the sublord period in all the Varga charts will show you something about what will manifest in your period. So what you can do is, this is a simple way that I do this for people and teach you how to do this. You can look at a page for Vargas. And again, I've got them in South India. So these are all my Vargas. So let's say so let's say we're looking at my Mars period. So we look at Mars and all the Vargas. Now it's in Aries in the Rashi chart, so it is strong. It's in the 6th house. It's a good positioning. There are problems with it, but I overcame. I had a lot of enemies attacking me in my Mars period, but I was always victorious. In the Drekina chart, which connected to siblings and it's kind of health, there's a lot of things. Mars is very strong in Leo in the 10th house. It is Digbala. I did have good relationships with my brothers during that period, but that wasn't always the case. I had a lot of breakthroughs in my relationship with my brothers in that period. Real estate, Aquarius rising here. I had Mars in the 9th house here. I had a lot of gains in real estate in my Mars period, and Mars is well placed in the 9th house here. In Libra, it was my Rahu period that things fell apart with real estate. I made a lot of money in real estate during my Mars period. In fact, all my wealth came during at that time. Mars is in the 3rd house in the Saptamsha. I was married. I did not have any children in my Mars period. You don't want planets in the 3rd house in a Varga chart. It's the 8th from the 8th. So I didn't have any children in my Mars period. My Navamsha chart, Mars is in the 1st here. Did create a Kuja dosha, so there was some friction with my relationship in my Mars period. So just this is an example of you can go through. I've got Mars in the 2nd here in my D10 chart. There's a lot of career elevation here. So you have to look at all the positions of your Dasha Lord in all the Varga charts, and you have to understand how to interpret them. And it can tell you something about what's going to work in the Varga period and what's not going to work in the Varga period. And it's not just all in the Rashi chart. You've got to learn how to interpret Vargas, and we'll do that in part 2 of the class. Dasha ruler in the Navamsha chart. Now, the Navamsha chart, is so important. It represents kind of our soul, our hidden personality talents. It represents, what happens when we get married. The Dasha ruler in D9 is very important, and how many houses the chart moves from D1 to D9 will tell you really how to predict what will happen in the Dasha period. I use this technique all the time. I'll teach it to you. So the Dasha, Dashas will bring issues of the house of both the placement in the D1 and the D9. So you have to always look at what's going on in the D9 chart. And again, I'm using my chart because I know it and I can say things that happen and be accurate and not have to look up things historically, and which takes time. I do case studies, but let's look at my chart again. Hold on, page 9. Again, I'm sorry, I'm back to South India here. Let's look at I'm just trying to look at a good example. Okay, let's look at my Venus period, which is really kind of a troubled period. I did not get, I very frustrated in relationship in my Venus period. I did not get married. I ran my Venus period age 11 to age 31. I hardly had any relationships. I was very frustrated in relationship. I was very scared of relationship. But even if we look at my Venus goes from Capricorn, and it moves 8 houses in my Navamsha chart to Gemini. So whenever you have 8, it's blocked, and it's with 2 malefics, right? So Venus, when we're judging, this Venus period was difficult. It's in a Parivartana Yoga exchange of houses between Saturn and Venus in the 12th and the 3rd in the natal chart. But in the Navamsha chart, it moves from Capricorn into Gemini, which is 8 houses. Anytime you move the planet 8 from the Rashi chart to the Navamsha chart, it's going to create, a need for transformation in a positive way, but it could create a lot of frustration, a lot of deep karma, and particularly because Venus is with Rahu and Saturn in the Navamsha chart. It was not a picnic time for me. I was at a very rough Venus period. There were some good things about it, but was good for me spiritually. Getting back to, let's go, getting back to the Varga charts here. I've got Venus in its own sign of Taurus in the chart of worship, the chart of spirituality. So I started meditating in my Venus moon period. I became a meditation teacher. I got very involved with yoga. I got very involved in studying Vedic astrology and stuff like that. So it was my Venus period was very good in this particular Varga chart, Venus in its own sign for spirituality. It was not good for relationship in the D9 chart. It was not good in general because the D9 chart is very important for placement. Now, I'll show you in the class, there's a chart of a famous Indian auto billionaire. And I've got his chart somewhere. I can't have to look up his name. I couldn't get it together before class. He has Virgo rising, and he went into a Jupiter. He was in a Jupiter period. Now Jupiter, he had Jupiter in the 12th in the Rashi chart in Leo, and Virgo is not. So it's Lord of the 7th and the 12th. You would say, okay, not good for business relationships. You looked at, Jupiter is just not a good planet for Virgos. It's a 7th house planet, but his Navamsha chart, Jupiter went from Leo into Sagittarius. It moved 5 houses. He became a billionaire in the auto industry during his Jupiter period. And, it's not something you would have seen in the natal chart, but because Jupiter moves 5 houses, 5s are always good in Vedic astrology for speculation, investment, and things like that. He had a very powerful Jupiter period and became a billionaire. But it didn't happen before then. It happened, you could see it in the relationship between the Rashi chart and the Navamsha chart. That's why it's very key. Now we always have to remember the moon chart. Again, people often, I've gotten in the habit of using the Rashi chart too much. The moon chart is very important. So we always have to look at the moon chart for interpreting the Dasha period also, because the Dasha is emotionally based, and it's going to tell us our emotional and mental temperament. So remember to use the moon chart. We'll have to get in the habit of doing that in class. Good. So I'm going to take a quick break and take questions now. I'm going to unmute you all. So that means your mics are open. You can ask a question. And I'll take a water break here.
This is me being ignorant. It's MJ again. What is a moon chart briefly, or where could I find information about what a moon chart is, please?
Okay, your moon chart is just run. Now my moon chart's identical. Let's look at John F. Kennedy. I have a page that has the moon chart on it. Okay. Okay, here's John F. Kennedy's chart. He's got his rising sign is Virgo. He's got Moon in Leo. So if we run the chart from Leo, we get the moon chart. So this is his moon chart. It's different from his natal chart because in this chart he's got Saturn in the 12th here. And in this, oh, I'm sorry, he has Saturn in the, I'm sorry, he has Saturn in the 12th here, but he has Saturn in the 11th from his natal chart. So there's a big difference in the moon chart. So the moon chart.
So we've just placed the moon on the ascendant and then moved the houses?
Yes, that's all you do.
Oh, that's awesome. Thank you.
Okay, great. Okay, any other quick questions? Every question is valid. Okay, I have a question from Joni Lee. Let me see if I can find it here. No sound. Yeah, I don't know why. I think everybody else is hearing me, I assume. Joni Lee, left because I guess she couldn't hear. I don't know why there was a problem with sound. Once in a while, you have to adjust your, so I did a sound check early. I'm sorry I didn't see your question, Joni, and Joni has left because she couldn't hear anything. I guess, okay.
You are very clear. Your sound is great.
Okay, I thought so. I've got a special block mic here, so I don't, sometimes people don't know how to use the controls, so hopefully they'll get the recording. Okay, I'm gonna move on. So one of the things that we're gonna do, okay, let me mute you all so we don't get any vacuum cleaners coming back on. Okay. Okay, Karkas. Karka means signification. And so when you're in a sun period, you're going to have things come up with father, government, monarchy, people in authority, bosses, stuff. Jupiter is the Karka for husbands, sons, teachers, gurus. So we can actually tell a lot about the period and what's going to happen just by the Karka value. And we'll spend some time going through this. And I'll just give you an example real quickly. So sun period, if the sun, in Vedic astrology, there's always qualifications, is it black or white? And there's always shadows of gray in there. So generally the sun is strong if the sun's in Leo or Aries where it's exalted, or it's in its own sign. If it's in a friend sign like Sagittarius, or Pisces is a problem because it's 8 houses away. But you can generally just tell Scorpio is probably going to be okay. And sun period is going to be good if the sun's placed in the 3rd, 6th, 10th, or the 11th houses. That's where it tends to do best. So a good sun period is going to bring up spiritual and political authority and leadership, confidence, independence, skilled at organizing, ability to honor those they admire, focus on your eternal being. There's always a spiritual energy to sun periods because it's connected to the divine. People are attracted to you in a sun period if the sun's well placed. Sharp, intuitive mind, respect, freedom, and creativity. Now, I have this slide later. I forgot to paste it here. If the sun's weak in the chart, let's say it's debilitated in Libra, if it's in the 12th house where it particularly gets lost, the sun wants to shine, you put the sun in the 12th house, it's hidden from view and nobody sees it. It's going to be a more difficult period. People aren't going to see you. You're not going to shine. You're going to have trouble with people in authority, with government and things like that. So you can actually, we can learn a lot about each period from its Karkas, and we'll study this in detail. Again, I'm not going to go through. I have this on a videotape on YouTube if you want to go through that. I did another promo for my Dasha class 3 years ago, and I went through all the Karkas in detail as part of the promo. If you want to go through that, it's on YouTube. You can listen to it. I'm trying to give a new overview of this new class, which is more in depth. So the other thing that's important about dashas and studying them is beginnings and endings. So the first part of the dasha is very concentrated. And in fact, like when I went through my Rahu period in 2009 to 2012, everything in my life changed very dramatically. I moved, we lost my house, I started changing my emphasis from financial astrology to teaching astrology and doing more personal charts. I had a surgery. Whenever you have, we could see this all in my chart here, but Rahu's in the 2nd house here. I had surgery on my throat. I had a benign tumor in my parathyroid gland. They did an operation on my throat. Rahu was also going over my natal 2nd house at the time. Again, I said we moved. I lost my house. There was all kinds of things that kind of happened when Rahu came up, and it was particularly concentrated. Come on. It was particularly so the beginnings of dashas are kind of packed. They're not very soft, and there's a little bit more concentration of karma. And the ending of dashas are also kind of difficult. So like Rahu Mars is often one of the more difficult periods in people's lives because it's the end of the Rahu period. If you haven't learned all your Rahu lessons, they tend to kind of come out in the end of a period. So one of the things about the end of a period is that if you have a lot of unfinished karma, it tends to kind of sprout in the last bhukti, and the combinations usually are not great. So the last bhukti of your Mercury period is Mercury K2. I don't have that right. No, it's K2 Mercury Venus rather. No, I'm sorry. Why am I having trouble with that? Anyway, the last bhukti, and I'm sorry, I'm spacing here. The last bhukti often, is just a difficult combination, and it's just things kind of fall apart because you're kind of finishing up some chapter that you've been doing in your life, and you have to get ready for a new chapter. And so sometimes things fall apart at the end of a period, so you get ready for the new period. So the end of a dasha, which is called a dasha chitra, is kind of this transitionary period into a new life, and you have to really understand what's happening there. I often get people calling me for readings at the end of these periods. Things are changing. I feel things are changing. At the end of a dasha period, you feel like things are changing and you want to change everything. And so you have to kind of understand what you're changing into and what karma you need to complete. There are also even yagas that are done at the very end of dashas. They're called dasha sandhi, and I work with Vedic pundits, and the last 3 or 7 days or 21 days, between your dasha period, you want to run a dasha sandhi, a yagya, because you want the death transition to go smoothly. You want to complete and honor the karma that wasn't completed in the last dasha, and you want to kind of prepare and honor the new energies that are coming into the new dasha. So the Vedic pundits have yagyas for that. So the beginning of dasha can be very concentrated. The end of dasha can be very transitional. We'll have a whole lesson studying those. Now the other thing is, and this doesn't happen that much, you have to run a dasha period you also have to run the transits of the dasha period and when the dasha period starts. So let's say you have a good Saturn period. Now Saturn can be good for some people. Let's say you have a powerful Saturn period. It's in the 6th house, maybe it's exalted, Taurus rising. You would normally predict, oh, it's going to be a great dasha period. But if your Saturn period starts when Saturn is transiting Aries in the 12th house from Taurus, it's just not going to be everything that was promised to you. So you have to kind of a good Jyotishi will actually run the transit for the new dasha period. See, is the new dasha lord, does he have dignity? Is he well placed from the natal chart? And you have to kind of run a chart at the start of a dasha period to also see the impact. So this is why these things are so complicated, that people say, well, the Jyotishi told me I was going to have this really great period and it didn't happen, and Jyotish doesn't work. Well, there are so many kind of like sophisticated rules that people have to study, and people don't always do them. But a good Jyotishi will, when you go into a new dasha period, you want to see what that planet is doing. You're going into a Venus period for a Taurus rising, and you got Venus in the 5th house, debilitated in Virgo, and you think it's going to be a terrible period, but by some chance your Venus period is going to start with Venus exalted in the 11th, and it's a wonderful period, and everybody predicted it would be a terrible period is wrong. And this is why it's just one of these funny things you have to do. Nakshatra rulers, we talked a little bit about. We're going to have 2 lessons on this. The nakshatra that the dasha ruler is in will color the nature of the dasha. So if your if you're running, if your nakshatra ruler is Revati, let's say, and we have to be specific. I don't want to, let's, we'll have to pull my chart up again because at least I can pull things out of my head. Okay, here's my chart again. So let's look at my moon, what do we want to look at? This is kind of a subtle thing, actually. My moon period, which, you know, there's a lot of really great things happen in my moon period. I was sick all the time, but moon's in Jesha nakshatra, so it's bringing in Mercury. It's channeling Mercury, and Mercury is in Dhanishta nakshatra. And Dhanishta is a very kind of affluent nakshatra. It's one of the Mars nakshatras. It's a sattvic nakshatra. It tends to bring a lot of money to people, and so just the fact that my moon was connected to Mercury and Mercury was connected to Dhanishta, a lot of money came in. I made a lot of money during my moon period. I mean, more money than I've ever made during my moon period. It wasn't just Lord of the Ninth and the First. It was because of these subtle connections, because moon was connected to Dhanishta. So there are all these kind of subtle ways that a nakshatra will color the period. There's also a relationship. The houses change. Now, this is something advanced I'm teaching for the first time. I do kind of fun advanced things here. You know, depending on where your sequence of dashas starts, your periods can run differently. So, I was born into Jesja, so my moon period was connected to Jesja. My Ketu period was connected to Mula. My sun period, I'm sorry, my Venus period, my Ketu period was connected to Mula. My Venus period was connected to Uttarashata nakshatra. My sun period was connected to Uttara. So your dashas will go in the order of the nakshatras from where your dashas start. So theoretically, there are 3 sets of dashas, and every one is different for everybody. So if, for example, if my moon were in a different Mercury nakshatra, if my moon was in Ashalesha, the quality of my dashas would be very different, because the moon would be, the sequence of nakshatras would have a different coloration than if it started from Jesja. And if my moon were in another Mercury dasha, which would, in this case, we're looking at Revati. If my moon were in Revati, the sequence of dashas would be different, and the coloration would be different. So this is an advanced thing. Again, I'm trying to teach things that people don't know. And I also sometimes, you know, I bring up more advanced and scholarly things here, but there are 3 kind of ways that your dashas can unfold. There are 3 sets from the sequence where your moon starts, and then the houses are going to be different also. And this is very advanced. And so, for example, if you have Venus in Bharani nakshatra, your Venus period is going to bring up the 2nd house and the 7th house, because Taurus and Libra are 2nd and 7th from Bharani. Whereas if your Venus is in Purva Phalguni nakshatra, Libra is 3 houses away, and Taurus is 10th house. So a Venus period connected to Purva Phalguni is going to be more connected to 3rd and 10th house things, maybe a career in the arts, and a Bharani nakshatra Venus period might be more connected to the 2nd and the 7th houses, might be about money and relationship and marriage and business partnership. So, you know, these are very subtle, advanced things. And I'm teaching this for the first time. I didn't teach it in my first Dasha class. I'm fascinated by it, but we will have a lesson on it. And it's kind of advanced, but I like to teach advanced things, and so I teach them clearly enough that people can understand them. Let's get back to the show. The Dasha and Bhukti of the Atmakarika is very important. Now, the Atmakarika is the planet with the highest number of degrees, or sometimes if we include Rahu, the lowest degree. And the Atmakarika governs the lessons of this incarnation, and they're not always easy lessons. And this comes from Jaimini astrology, and Sanjay Rath talks about, we used to think that the Atmakarika is the king of the chart. Well, no, it's really that the king rules the chart, and the king is the Atmakarika, and the king tells you you're going to go through this. So the Atmakarika lessons are very difficult. Like if Venus is your Atmakarika, and it's in the 8th house, Atmakarika lessons are often very difficult. They bring about life-changing, earth-shattering things that you need to learn in this lifetime. So we always have to look at the Atmakarika Dasha periods because they bring major events. They bring life-changing. A Venus, an example, Venus and Atmakarika might bring divorce, separation, major breakups and separation, because that's, and that's when Venus is the Atmakarika, usually you're learning things about, you have major lessons in this life about the Atmakarika. If Sun is your Atmakarika, maybe you have to learn, lesson is also often about humility. It's about lessons around your father, about government, and working with bosses and things like that. Sun Atmakarika dashas are going to bring those major lessons up. So Atmakarika dashas, even if you think they're going to be good, they always bring up life carnation lessons. So we have to kind of learn those. I think I'm going to have to throw in a lesson on that. I have studied it before with my classes. Talked about Vargas already. Okay. I don't want to talk too much. I don't want to blow you away. I do want to talk a little bit about part 2 of the class, which starts on May 10th. And there's some, I'm teaching some more advanced things that usually aren't taught, just because I think I like doing that. But sometimes we need, in the article I wrote, sometimes we need to use alternative dashas to get results. And there are 32 dashas that Parashara talks about. And the one that's used most is Vimshotri dasha, but it's not always the best one to use. And sometimes we have to, use other dashas, and they will give us better results. And we'll have a couple lessons on this. I mean, we could have a whole, 12-week class on this. I'm not quite ready to go there with it, but I just want you to be aware of that sometimes there are other dashas. Now in the software, we can actually go dashas for. Okay, so the software has gotten really kind of good now. So it used to be, there are all these alternative dashas. So like if you have Taurus or Libra rising in the Navamsha chart, you can use an alternative dasha. If you have Rahu in a Kendra or a trinal house, you can use a certain dasha. And the software will look at the chart now and tell you which dashas to use. So for my chart, I can also use Shoditsari dasha because I have a waning moon and I was born at night. I can use so the computer program is telling you which dashas to use, and we'll learn some of the rules for when to use those dashas by hand, so you know them. But they're kind of interesting, and sometimes they give you better results. Often they give you better results than Vimshotri dasha, which is another reason people say, well, Jyotish doesn't work, he got it all wrong, because they may not be using the right dasha. Vimshotri dasha is the king of the dashas. It's calculated from the moon of birth. It runs 120 years. There are actually a number of different Vimshotri dashas, and sometimes you have to decide if the moon is stronger than the rising sign, and if the rising sign is stronger, then you have to change the program. There are also dashas that sometimes you have to choose a different nakshatra to start the dasha from, and that's called Utman Vimshotri dasha. And again, and I'm not even going to teach that, but it's just I want you to be aware of. This is why Vedic astrology is so complicated. The Ashatari Dasha, you know, is used, Ashatari Dasha is used when Rahu is not in the first house, but in the fourth, seventh, or 10th houses, and or in the fifth and the ninth houses. Then you can use this dasha. It may give better results, and it also may be applicable if you were born during a waxing moon I'm sorry, if you were born during a waning moon, or you have to remember all these rules, but if you were born during a waxing moon, you can use it, and you can also use it if you're born during a waning moon. It may give you better results, and it has different rules. And then there's this other alternative dashas, you know, they're based on whether you're born in a waxing moon or a waning moon, and things like that. And luckily the software, we'll learn quickly some of the rules for looking for them, but they do give you better results if you use them. If, like I said, if you use Dwadachari Dasha, which if you have Taurus or Libra rising the D9 chart, if you have a Virgodama Lagna, we'll see that with Becker, famous football player. He's Aquarius rising, Aquarius Navamsha rising. You can predict stuff. You can predict the rise of his career better using Shatabika Dasha if you have a Virgodama Lagna. Not that, kind of rare. If you have the Lord of the 10th and the 10th, you can use Chatushitsama Dasha. That's kind of a rare thing. It does come up. So there are all these kind of conditional dashas. If you have Sun in the Lagna, you can use Shatashyayana Dasha. And the computer program will help calculate these. I mean, the problem, no one ever uses these because, you know, in the old days, you know, you had to like knew all the rules for calculating these dashas, and then you had to kind of spend hours like calculating them by hand. And you know, no one bothered, so they got lazy and they just used Vimshotri Dasha. But sometimes the alternative dashas are better, and the computers do them all now. Even some of the freeware does it, and so you can. And most of the programmers are not all the programs are ideal, but Sri Jyoti Star, he spent 9 years kind of doing this stuff, and it works well. Jagannath Tahora, I hear, does work well. I don't know. Okay, I want to stop early and take questions. Again, if you're, there's a lot of things that we can cover, especially at a promo class. I don't want to call it a promo class. At the first class, I don't want to blow you out. I will end early and take some questions. I will kind of remind you, if you're interested in if you're interested in my classes, you can contact me at Barry2 at appliedvedicastrology.com, and you can go to the website. You'll get a copy of this video if you want to rewatch it, and they'll have a link to sign up for the class. The class is $195. Sometimes people need payment plans. I'm happy to help people with that. Most people use credit cards for their own payment plan. If you don't have credit cards and you need a PayPal payment plan, I can set that up for you. I kind of teach classes out of the love of teaching. It's my favorite, most dharmic thing. Obviously don't make a huge amount of money or a living on these classes. Some of my colleagues charge $1,000 or $1,500 for classes like this, and I, you know, again, these $195 for 10 lessons is, you know, $19 a class. So it's, you know, these are bargain prices. So don't really want to barter too much with people, but you know, everybody has a budget, and I will work with you if you need help. Afi, can you get online and just say something about your experience with my classes?
Of course, Barry. I've been studying with Barry for, I think it's over 2 years now.
Yeah.
Do you know? Okay. And I find him as a teacher very clear, very methodical, has a vast amount of information that he delivers perfectly. And I also find him very fair And his classes are easy to follow, easy to understand. He answers questions. He cares about his students. And I've really enjoyed his classes. I've learned tremendous amount of techniques and gained a lot of knowledge from Barry. And I really appreciate him.
Thank you, Effie. Again, it's very funny in our world. You know, you kind of have to get out there to be seen, and that's why I'm always publishing articles and making videotapes and stuff like that. And on some level, I'm also very humble. I certainly and you'll find that about me too. It's this balancing act being in a Rahu period with a Ketu ruled nakshatra. You have to get out there to be seen. At the same time, my humility always comes through because that's who I am. But I'm always honored, to serve people and help them, and that's what my life is about. Kathy had a question. Let me unmute you. So your mics are unmuted. Kathy, you should be able to get on the mic and answer your question. I just unmuted you for sure. Kathy, do you have a question? Can you get on the mic, Kathy? Did you find the mic? Hey, Kathy, nice to meet you. I'm not hearing you.
I don't know. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you now. Yes. I can hear you. So just talk into the mic. You should come through.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Sorry. Can you read the question? I don't think you can hear me.
I can hear you, and I will look at your question. What if the Dasha ruler is placed very close, within 1 degree of a major angle? Okay, let me I'm trying to pull this up, so I'm going to have to enlarge it. Okay. Okay, so Kathy, I can hear you. I did hear you, but for some reason, I'm not sure why the sound wasn't coming through. So if the Dasha ruler is placed very close within 1 degree of a major angle of the chart, will it affect both houses or not? Or opposing 1 or 2 houses, is there an orb of influence? It's a good question. Yeah, when you look at when we study planetary aspects, whenever you have a strong aspect or if you're on a strong house cusp, it can have a major impact. So the answer is yes, it will have more of an impact if the angle is strong. So like sometimes you have Saturn at 29 degrees aspecting Sun at 1 degree on the other side of the sign. It's not a strong aspect, and so the influence, is going to be there. So Vedic astrology teaches, stuff aspects house to house. The reality is that you're going to have a major impact. It's going to be if there's a tight angle. Usually a tight angle is 3 to 5 degrees. So whenever you have a planetary aspect of a conjunction is going to be intense, of course. Maybe a planetary war, it will definitely impact the Dasha. An aspect which is 1 degree away, 3 degrees away, it's going to have a stronger impact than something that's 29 degrees. And then, yeah, there is a thing I'm teaching in my class next week on houses, that planets sometimes go into 2 houses, and the Rashi house, the house that it's actually in, is going to have the most material manifestation, but how we feel may be impacted if in some of the other house systems, the Baba Chalet, which is sometimes called it's kind of the subjective house. There's sometimes you can be in the 9th and the 10th house. This is a real problem. Let's say you're in the 9th and the 8th house. Let's say in one house system, you have something in the 9th house, so you get good luck manifesting for that thing, but you may have an 8th house energy about it when you think about it, and you're not happy with it. So sometimes houses can go be in 2 places, and that can impact, again, this whole objective subjective thing. You may get a result, which is sometimes what we care about, but sometimes we care about more how we feel. We want to get divorced, but our husband's supporting us, and he's bringing all this money, so that can happen with these kind of impacts when we have two houses. Okay. Did that answer your question, Kathy?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, great. I can't hear you. So somebody had a question about
Okay.
Ritu. This lady who had a question left. How to integrate. Yeah, the thing about Jyotish is it's kind of encyclopedic, and if you're serious about it, you have to study it. You listen, you get the PowerPoints ahead of time, you go over them, you hear the live lecture, you ask questions based on having studied the material ahead of time, you listen to the tape of the lesson afterwards, and then you get it. So sometimes it takes about 3 times to really kind of pick up these principles. I mean, the first time I study after 30 years. I'm always studying because it's always encyclopedic. And the first time I hear something new, I don't get it, and then I have to go back and apply it to my chart and to case study charts, and then I listen to the lecture again, and then, oh my God, that's really profound. Yeah, it takes that. It takes a lot. I do put out these cookbooks on how to go through and all the rules of dashas. I have one for my dasha class already. Maybe there's 15 things that you look at when you evaluate a dasha, and if you go over the checklist, you quickly look at them, and then you can synthesize that in maybe 5 minutes. But it's hard to keep it all in your head. Yeah, good question. I know you had to leave already. Good. Got 13 people left. Other questions? So, for those of you who love, I think MJ has a question. I just unmuted you, MJ. So can you get on the line and ask your question live?
Well, actually, my question was a thank you. I just wanted to thank you for a clear and informative class. So I'm a real beginner in Jyotish, but I was able to follow pretty much everything you explained. And I know with Jyotish, that's not a small feat. So thank you.
Okay, you're welcome. That's what I do. If you're interested, my Foundations 1 and 2 classes are online under courses under appliedvedicistrategy.com. Because if you need a payment plan, fine. You can study Jyotish on your own because I'm very clear, and you listen to the tape, you look at the PowerPoints, and I am. So if you even want to jump into my Foundations 2 class, you probably could know enough to pick it up. So if you're interested in to study with me, that'd be great. I love my students. I love teaching. Again, I don't get rich teaching Jyotish. I wish, but it's not the case. So I'm glad I do it on the weekends, and it's my love. And I do readings during the week. Good question. Other questions, Carmen? Carmen, did you have any questions? Okay, there's a thing called Jyotish overload. The ideal time for a class is maybe an hour and a half. I usually teach 2-hour classes. If we did hour and a half classes, then we'd have 15 lessons. So, but sometimes it's easier to assimilate. Kathy. So again, if you're interested in the class, you can sign up on my website. You'll get a link to get more information on it. Love to have you. The class is definitely happening. I think we have 5 people registered already. My classes sometimes are very intimate, and you get a lot of attention. There aren't 50 people taking my classes, so if you want to study deeply with me, you'll have that chance. Okay, I'm going to rest my voice. My final Jeopardy answer is thank you again for coming. And my YouTube channel does have introductions to all my classes on it. Financial Astrology by Barry Rosen is my YouTube channel. So if you're interested in another class on my website, a class like this, which is an introduction to the whole class, is available on my YouTube channel. And I am starting to do more podcasts. And certainly you can get on my mailing list and read my newsletters and things like that. Rahu Ketu is obsessed with Jyotish. What can we say? Anyway, take care, everybody. And I will see you Spiritual astrology class will meet again next week at 12 o'clock. There's 2 more lessons live, and then Dasha class will start on February 29th with lesson 2. Take care, everybody. Bye.